All right, I want to show you some adaptive layout because it's much more intuitive when you see it as opposed to talk about it. So we discussed this today in class, and I've got this calculator layout. These buttons are 80 points square. This one is a little bit wider. You see I have a bit of a gap in between the buttons. Now, let's think for a second, how would we do the auto layout for this? I don't really want to hard code the button size. That's dysfunctional. Maybe what I could think about is I'd like to specify a leading and a trailing for a row of buttons. So I like it to be a certain number of points, so I control drag from the 7, control drag from the 7 to the left and pick leading space to the safe area. And that's saying constant is 20. And where did that 20 come from? Well, it came from, you drag this thing around and you find that blue guideline. And the blue guideline is set at 20 points. Now, you're seeing that I've got this error here. It wants to have some missing constraints supplied, and yeah, there's a lot more we need to do. Okay, so we've specified the initial leading there. Let's also create ourselves a ratio. We want to have a 1-to-1 aspect ratio of height and width. Okay, so now whatever the height is, the width is going to be, and we need some other things to pin this to. All right, let's go then lock down our label. So our label, we'd like leading space to the safe area, top space, and I'd like trailing space as well. And so I'm going to control drag and put a trailing space in here. But now let's adjust what those are. Now if I select a constraint, I can double click and I can edit it right here. So if we say, well, we're going to go with 20 like has been specified before, 20, 20, and let's do 20 at the top as well. It's not quite 20 there, but now it is. And okay, great. We've got that position. Now let's put a little bit of spacing in between the 7 and that label. So control drag vertical spacing, and the vertical spacing says that constant is 9.33. Let's make it 8. 8 is a more round number, and that's probably more like what I'd really want. Okay, so far so good. What do I do about these other buttons? Well, I would like to. Okay, now before I move on, let me observe. In addition to saying that I want 7 leading 20, I could have said, you know what? Let's, instead of specifying it that way, let's put a constraint that the leading edges of these two controls are the same. And since this one is set to 20 right there, then our 7, whose leading is the same, is also going to be 20. And I want to try to do things relative to other widgets in the UI so that I can make minimal adjustments to change my user interface. So in fact, let's do the same thing on our plus. Let's say that we want the trailing edges to be the same. And so now it's going to pin the right edge. And now let's go put fixed spacing, horizontal spacing. And if I look at the constant there, these are set to 8. These are 8 points apart, so horizontal spacing. And again, oh, that one says 7.5, so let me go adjust that one. Actually, I'll click on it here. Change that to 8. And another one that says, let's put a horizontal spacing, and that one is set to 8. Okay, so top space is 8 and horizontal spacing is 8. And now I want to constrain all of these buttons so that their height and width are the same as 7 here. So if I control drag between the two, how do I set the equal widths and heights? Well, actually equal widths and heights won't be quite enough because I want to be sure that my top edges are the same as well. So I'm going to hold down the shift key and I select top, and now I want to say equal widths and equal heights. Okay, now things are a little bit funky here. Let me control drag, and we're going to do the same thing. I want the tops to be the same, and I want equal widths and heights. Okay, and now, let's see, what am I missing? So my plus, yeah, all right. So now I want to control drag from the 9 and the plus, and the tops are the same, and I want equal widths and equal heights. And now finally, when I get all of the constraints in place, that's when it redrew these things so that they were more reasonable. Now let's run this on a simulator. and see what happens at runtime. I know we haven't constrained everything yet, but did we even get close here? Is the strategy working? And it looks to me like, yes, the strategy is working. My 7, 8, and 9 are all the same size. They've got a 1-to-1 aspect ratio, which is a little hard to tell because this next row of buttons is in the way. Here, let me just move them out of the way temporarily and rerun. But in Interface Builder here in Xcode, I'm not seeing them laid out exactly the way I'd see them at runtime. Don't know why it doesn't update them properly, but maybe it's because I haven't specified all the constraints yet. Anyway, it looks like this is working fine, and if I rotate now to landscape, well, you can see what my problem is. I'm pinned to the left and right edges, and I'm going to want to adapt this user interface. But okay, I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to specify all the right constraints for the rest of these buttons. I'm going to have a fixed gap in between all of these, and I'm going to constrain the heights and widths to be the same. The only thing that's going to be different down here, I get to the equal button, and I'll specify it a little bit differently. I'll tie it to the leading and trailing edges of this decimal point and divide button. Okay, so I'll do that off camera. Okay, through the magic of editing, I've gone through and I've added constraints on all these other buttons so that when I run this, you see that everything except for the equal button has been constrained properly. In order to fix the display here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here where it says misplaced views. I'm going to go to this dialog box, say update the frames and apply to all views in the container, fix misplacement. So now let's go reposition our equal button and drag it to the size I want it to be. And now let's set its constraints. All right, so if I control drag between this and the AC, I want the horizontal spacing set to 8 points. I want them at the same top. I want them to have equal heights. Okay, but now I'm missing one last constraint, and that is I want the trailing edge to be the same as the trailing edge of the divide button. So now I'm going to control drag over here and say I want trailing edges. And now I think I'm fully constrained. And yeah, I don't have any errors up here anymore. When I run this thing, we'll see that everything lays out just fine. And if I auto-rotate, then yeah, I've got a problem. I need to do an adaptive layout to change the way that it works in landscape. So let me just show you one more thing. So if I go to a different size phone, so there's the Plus, here's the iPhone 8, here's the SE, the iPhone SE, and the iPhone 4S, and you see it's adapting to all of those just fine. That works great. Now let's go to the newer phones. There's the 10S and the 10R and 10S Max. Okay, it all looks fine. All right, great. So let's go back to just the regular iPhone 8. All right, now, next thing we need to do is we need to say, how do we handle rotation to landscape? This is where we want to vary our traits. Now, one thing that we can do, I told you in class that we can go select in the Attributes Inspector. Anything that has a plus on the left of it is something that you can vary in a different size class. So in particular, I want that, that label to get a little bit smaller because vertical space is precious. And so let's change the font, and I hit the plus. And now, what do I want to introduce the variation based on? If I say, well, let's add a variation based on a compact height and a width, I can add that variation, and you'll see that this is a variation for WC and HC, width compact, height compact. That's actually a little bit broader than I need. Let me click the X to get rid of that. Let me try again. I don't really care what the width is, so I'm going to go to any. And I'm going to add a variation that's based on now any width, but the height is compact. And now let's roll that down to 29, and you see it adjusting as I tap the down button here, step it down. Oops, and I went too far. Okay, it's buffering up all those clicks. Sorry. Okay, get back to 29. Okay, and now I have the smaller display label when I'm in the landscape mode. I also might want to change this guy, that little constraint there. I can do the same thing. I can go to its constant, hit the plus, and I can say, look, I want an any height and, any width, but compact height, add the variation, and I can say, let's have a minimal margin. Let's set it to maybe 4 points. And now I'm starting to save some vertical space. Okay, great, that's fine, but I want to make some big changes. And that is, I really don't want to have the layout now be based on the leading and the trailing margin here. I really need it to be based on the top and the bottom margin. So I need a totally different style for doing this. Okay, in the next part, I'll show you how we introduce that variation.